Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim. I'm from Arrow in Denmark. Today we're going to talk about McAfee's Mission EDR, and I have actually brought a couple of guests with me. I have brought Peter Helms from McAfee and Markus Wirtel from McAfee as well. And Markus, he's the one that actually is going to take us through the ways of the McAfee EDR. So basically, I think I will just hand it over to you, Markus. I hope you will introduce yourself, and then I probably will interrupt you at some point if I get some questions and so on. And for all you guests on the call, if there are any questions, please use the question box to actually send the question. Then we will, of course, reply to them as quickly as possible.
Excellent. Yeah, I hope we have lots of questions. As I get paid by the question, I hope you're going to ask a few. So yes, my name is Markus Wirtel. I'm an enterprise technology specialist in McAfee I've been with McAfee for over 8 years. I focus specifically on threat investigations. That's what do we mean by that field? I focus specifically on incident response and analytics in that space. So I'm very much aligned towards security operations, and in this field, of course, I spend a lot of time on EDR as well, meaning Gartner's definition of endpoint detection and response. What I will show you in the next hour is an introduction into the product, but we're going to fairly quickly move into a live demo as well, and I will do a couple of differentiations with regards to common misperceptions with what constitutes EDR, where does EDR go as well, because EDR as a technology isn't new, it's been around for quite some time, and there's a lot of innovation happening in the market space. We have some McAfee specific views on that innovation and capabilities that I would certainly like to highlight, because EDR doesn't stand on its own. It's another tool in your toolbox, if you like, to deal with a rather complex problem. And on its own, it fixes certain things, but once you come across a different problem that EDR isn't suitable for, let's say, for example, unmanaged devices, then you need to reach for something else. So launching into this, and as I'm starting to differentiate already here with regards to misperception or differentiation from different technologies, let me start it with one of the most common things that I hear regularly, that EDR is a replacement for traditional endpoint protection technologies, which is certainly not the case. The reality is that you need both. You need endpoint protection, sometimes referred to as traditional or conventional antivirus capabilities, with everything else that kind of comes along in the last few years, like machine learning, like reputation-based capabilities, behavioral tracing and analysis, again, back to machine learning, and as well as containment capabilities around dynamic containment of application code. All of these are useful to deal with known bad actors and known bad threats, while EDR augments this with the capability of analyzing things that are likely to slip past. This is particularly prevalent with fileless attacks, in particular living off the land attacks, LOL attacks, which leverage in particular PowerShell. Doesn't need to be PowerShell, can be .NET and other things as well, but there are some limits with regards to traditional endpoint protection to provide, well, I wouldn't say provide adequate coverage. We have significant capabilities that have been built in there as well, but given the premise that you're not going to be able to 100% protect everything, you need to have a secondary investigation capability to deal with the stuff that may slip past. So when you have adaptive defenses, that investigative capability is critical as well. If you want an analogy, think of an airport. You have control mechanisms and capabilities that are static, security gates, boarding pass scanners, your IDs may be checked and so on. They're static controls, or relatively static controls, that will assume that you can't get past without going through those controls. Having said that, it does happen. Yeah, so people do manage to slip past or manage to bypass or get through a door that wasn't properly secured or something, and then you need to switch into a different modus of investigation. So you start using CCTV cameras. You have people going around with walkie-talkies trying to identify someone or trying to check on certain things, etc., which is more interactive investigation, if you like. And the same capability here really applies to EDR as well, where we have the ability to interrogate stuff that might not be malicious, but you need to have the interrogation capability to actually pick the stuff that might have slipped past. All of this doesn't sit in a vacuum. In security operations, we typically have 3 core processes that make up most of the security operations activities. There is incident response. So when somebody has managed to run past the gate, how do you track that person down? And in IT, of course, this would be if something has slipped past, how do you identify a particular process, a particular IP connection or so to switch into mitigation. Also, scoping is a component, and this is sort of the gray zone between incident response and threat hunting, where once you've identified that you have an incident, the next question is, what's the scope of this incident? Is this just one machine? Is this multiple machines? What did the attacker do? Where are they within the kill chain as such? What sort of mitigation actions at this point are appropriate to try and deal with it or not? And then more in the proactive space, threat intelligence, which again goes hand in hand with threat hunting as well, to be perfectly honest, where internal as well as external threat intelligence is used to improve your posture and your understanding of your threat model, while at the same time maybe providing the needed indicators of compromise or indicators of attack for threat hunting. EDR sits as a tool somewhere between these 3 brackets, or 3 bubbles, if you like, where it enables certain functionality in each one of them. It doesn't do everything. It's not a tip platform, so you need something to actually provide you with threat intelligence. You need something to help you sift through that threat intelligence feed or the feeds that you're having to discern some meaningful information for threat hunting. Threat hunting is also a domain that is EDR is going to be a really, really important tool for, but it won't be the only tool that is needed. So things like memory forensics and so on tend to be a more specialized area. But talking about security operations and how you actually measure things, I would use a simple example, and I will refer to this a couple of times later on as well. When I think of an attack as it's commencing all the way through to what is typically termed remediation, there are kind of 2 major milestones in between, which is the D and the R part in EDR, the detection and the response milestones. You can measure efficacy in this space, and there are common terms like MTTR, mean time to remediate, or mean time to respond. Companies interpret the MTTR sometimes differently, and sometimes they also have a different understanding of what response constitutes. I've had some customers that figured opening a ticket constitutes a response. Now, you can argue as to whether that is an appropriate way to measure this, but I'll leave it there. The other big one is, of course, mean time to detect, because that, of course, measures the efficacy of your detection capabilities. How long until you actually have a positive signal to noise ratio alert that indicates that you have a valid detection. What is often overlooked between these 2 classic metrics, MTTD and MTTR, is something that I'd like to term MTTU. The mean time to understand, the time frame from getting a positive alert to a position where you think, yeah, I'm now confident enough that I'm going to act on this. So that includes your false positive investigations. Yeah, is this a genuine alert or is this a false positive? It includes context enrichment, where you think, yeah, this is a positive alert, but I'm not quite sure if this is good enough to quarantine the laptop of my CFO. Yeah, I want to be absolutely certain that I know what the hell I'm doing before I do that kind of action. So context enrichment is definitely relevant here. And there is potential to enhance this process through automation, A lot of customers are looking to SOAR tools, SOAR tools for security orchestration, automation, and response. Things like Phantom, Demisto, Swimlane. There's some open source platforms as well, like Intel MQ or Node-RED, which help in streamlining many of the repetitive processes in this kind of process chain. But you're not going to be able to take the human out of the loop. Yeah, the idea is probably to do most of the automation before and after that decision point, but the decision point, the human decision point, still remains. And this is pretty much where we started our approach with EDR from, where we know there is significant orchestration capability after a decision has been taken. And we've done an awful lot here with DXL and with our response capabilities we built around DXL to facilitate automation and timely reactions in the response side, so you can respond with speed. But to address MTTU in particular, we have focused on ways to accelerate that security analysts to make them either faster in terms of removing repetitive steps that involved investigations, or to assist a less senior, less versed security analyst by guiding their investigation along best practice. When I say guiding along best practice, I'm talking about best practice according to the SANS Institute. We have a SANS instructor as well who's been involved in setting up many of the investigation guides that are part of the product. So there's some 42 investigation guides that will guide a junior analyst along best practice as they're going through an investigation. But I'll show you that live. I think that becomes a bit clearer. Now, talking about mVision EDR, I should probably first of all clarify what we mean by mVision. mVision is a label or a brand that we attach to products that are cloud-centric, as opposed to many of the legacy products that we've had that were, let's say, maybe developed with a focus to on-premise capabilities and maybe cloud capabilities secondary. This is a version of that process where developing these products cloud first, delivered through the cloud. They are resident in the cloud, and they will be specifically in the first instance set up to facilitate protections in the cloud as well, but can then extend into the endpoint on-premise estate and so on. So there is a couple in here. mVision EDR is part of that. So it is a SaaS service. For anybody who's familiar with a preceding product, which we called McAfee Active Response, this is sort of the next generation of that capability. There are certain elements of MAR, Active Response, in mVision EDR, but it goes significantly beyond that. In fact, what we did is we merged capabilities from Active Response with another product we called McAfee Investigator. And between these two, we took the best capabilities of these two products and created a new one, cloud delivered as a SaaS service. I should stress one point. For me, this makes a difference. Some of you may be familiar with certain terms like snapshots and investigations and so on from a forensics perspective. And certainly EDR can be used as a forensics tool, but it isn't a substitute for a full forensic tool, because there are things like full memory grabs or snapshots of hard drives and so on that you would be doing for a forensic investigation, which you wouldn't really be doing in incident response, because in incident response, you got to act in a timely fashion, whereas in a forensic investigation, you're going to be focusing less on time and more on things like chain of custody, making sure nothing is altered, you preserve the evidence as is so it can be used in court and so on. Whereas in incident response, it's more a rapid response action, if you like, because you still have a chance to do something about the attack that you have now detected to stop exfiltration of data or manipulation of databases and so on. So time is more critical in an IR context, whereas integrity and completeness is a focus in forensic investigation. When I'm going through the rest of the presentation now, I'm referring to the incident response context more so than a forensic analysis. There's also a useful concept to bear in mind here. This is loosely modeled on Pavlov's pyramid of needs. This is sort of the pyramid of incident response needs, what I'm trying to illustrate with this is that there is no point starting with a capability like EDR or threat intelligence, etc., if the foundation isn't there. So before you can derive any value from this, you really need to have the foundation insofar that you know what assets you're protecting. You have the capability to receive telemetry across this estate, which can then give you detection capability, which you can then use for all the subsequent steps. So if you don't have a broad sensoring grid of sensors that cover most of your potential intrusion vectors, web, email, network, removable media, etc. If you don't have that capability, then you're going to have blind spots. But blind spots, of course, it doesn't matter what unique capability you apply to investigation and to alerting, you will have that blind spot. So if you're only able to manage devices only, well, what about that contractor that is allowed to connect to your network? Maybe I had this personally a couple of years ago with a bank where, of course, everything was managed, but there was some machine in the comms room which was gathering all the CCTV data, which was from a contractor, which was on the network, but wasn't managed by them. Which, when we actually investigated what was happening on the network, we found that machine had a disabled and broken old antivirus back then that was hasn't been touched in over half a year, and of course that machine had been infected with something and caused havoc on the internal network, which we actually only picked up out of network behavior. So having the capability to have broad sensoring is critical to achieve completeness of vision and therefore completeness of alert probability in that estate. So as I mentioned earlier, EDR is a SaaS-based service. So that means that the telemetry that we're gathering with EDR is being sent into a cloud platform, into the McAfee cloud. In fact, we're using Amazon Web Services as the underlying layer. We have a couple of data centers that we're utilizing at present. There are, of course, some in the US. We also have one in Frankfurt. There's also one in Sydney. And there will be more as the product is growing. Right now, for the EMEA region, we're happy enough with the Frankfurt data center, which is extremely highly certified in terms of its platform availability and security. So we're happy enough with that. The data is being sent into this platform and held within this geography. When I say data here, by the way, I'm referring to metadata. So this is file operations, this is process creations, this is socket creations and IP connections and so on, but not content. So we're not sending actual file content or anything into the cloud, which of course would be an issue for things like GDPR. By the way, there is a GDPR compliance document for this, where we're also detailing what information is being sent into the cloud. The data is then subjected to cloud-centric analysis. So there is a rather comprehensive back-end system here that will parse this data specifically for detection, as well as archiving these traces for long-term storage. There's two models. There's a 30-day and a 90-day version in terms of the time horizon for these traces. That also then can allow me hunting. You can use these capabilities for scoping, for clarification, or for incident response, which then leads to a alert. And if your confidence level is high enough around this, I'll show you in a moment what I mean by that, you can then immediately step towards response actions like to quarantine a device or to kill a process and so on. Or you end up with one or the other two possible outcomes in triage, because there's three really. Yeah, in triage, you have either, oh my God, this is really bad, I need to do something immediately because it's kind of obvious what's going on. That's one. The other extreme is like, no, this is obviously false positive. This shouldn't even be there. I want to make sure that this doesn't come up in my console again. So exclusions, that's the other scenario. And then the third one, and not too uncommon, somewhere in between. Yeah, you're not quite sure if this is a false positive, but at the same time, it looks bad enough that this could be something really, really bad, but you need more context. And that's where you would really step into a investigation. These investigations in the product are guided. So there is is a form of AI. I prefer to call it an expert system because I'd like to be precise on this. Expert system isn't a machine learning, self-learning algorithm. It is a prescriptive set of codified rules that are being used to interrogate data sets. The principle behind it is one called of competing hypotheses. So that means that the product will look at the data it has available, come up with likely questions, answer its own questions, and out of these answers might derive other questions, which is the sort of typical process that you may see when you're going through an investigation. Meaning, let's say your alert is telling you, well, this file was executed in the recycle bin, which isn't quite normal. Normally, you don't have executions from the recycle bin. So you might start asking some questions. Well, what kind of file? Do I know anything about this file? Reputation. Have I seen this file anywhere else? Prevalence. Yeah. Has this been executed once or has it been executed many times before? That's on the file. Then what did the file do? Did it start a process? You know, it started a process. What did the process do? Did it touch the file system? Did it touch any other files? Did it touch any other processes? Did it make any changes to the registry? And for any of these, if the answer is yes, you're going to end up with subsequent questions. What about network? Did it establish a network connection? Yes, it did. Was that network connection internal or external? Well, that makes a difference. If it's external, do I know anything about the IP address? Is there anything, is it a known bad IP address either in our GTI or maybe on VirusTotal or any other sort of threat repository that might give me some insight as to what I'm dealing with? And the chain continues. The investigation guides will carry out a lot of these preliminary question chains, if you like, automatically. So when you're sitting down, they're already done. I'll show you that. And you can enrich this further. So at present, we're actually able to run queries or include information from SIEM systems as well. In fact, there's two use cases with SIEM systems. One is threat surfacing. So the alert could come from an endpoint, but it could also come from a correlation that fired in your SIEM system. That can be pretty much any SIEM system, although we're officially supporting 3. That would be our own, as well as ArcSight, as well as Splunk. We're looking to add a few more now this year as well. But having said that, a lot of this is based on consuming a syslog feed. So this could actually be achieved with many other SIEM systems as well. That's the sort of threat surfacing. So let's say this particular correlation that fires indicates a certain internal IP address, which of course points to an internal client. If that is identified, then the EDR can reach back to that client or look at the endpoint traces from this client to correlate information we've received from the SIEM now with information that came from the endpoint trace. That's one use case. The second one is something that we call enrichment, which allows me to ask additional questions of the SIEM system to enrich an investigation I'm already carrying out. I'll demonstrate that when I'm going through the whiteboard in a second, where I might ask questions for things like, have you ever seen this particular IP address before? Not just on my managed endpoints, but maybe also on one of the firewall logs or so. That extends the visibility of my EDR beyond the managed estate into the overall censoring grid, which then helps me to piece together pieces that would otherwise be in my blind spots as far as EDR is concerned. Now, to quickly sum up again what I mentioned with regards to sort of the data we're sending or that is being sent into the cloud, metadata I already touched on. The data that we're sending here is specific for detection. What do I mean by that? It means we're not sending everything. There is no need to send everything. Some EDR solutions that send everything that they can possibly send do that because they have no means to reach back to the endpoint for later clarification. So they do pretty much storage capture of everything, which creates significant load on the endpoint client as well as on the network. Volumes in the network in particular can be significant with that sort of approach. Since we have the ability to couple a couple of techniques, including real-time queries as well as the management capabilities we have through our e-policy orchestrator, we don't necessarily need to do that. We only need to send what we need for our detection algorithms, as well as subsequent historical interrogation of trace data, and everything else can be held on demand, if you like. And there are two types of on-demand queries that may happen. One is what we call a snapshot. This is kind of where I put the disclaimer with regards to forensics out there initially. This isn't a snapshot like a hard drive snapshot where or memory snapshot where I take the entirety of the memory. This is a enhanced data collection using a temporary agent that gets deployed, which will pull data back that I need from a suspicious machine. So if I consider 2-3 machines to be potentially involved in an attack, I can do a more comprehensive data collection from these machines that basically is delivered through EPO to the machines. The agent does an enhanced data collection, including things like URL, browsing history, and so on, that wouldn't be normally streamed up, which helps again with GDPR compliance and other aspects. But during an investigation, I need that data. Yeah, I pull that data now back on demand, which then helps me enrich my investigation going forward. The other part, and this kind of goes hand in hand, is our real-time queries. And I'll show you live in a moment what I mean, why they are relevant, because looking at EDR purely as a historical investigation tool misses the mark. You always need to be able to answer two fundamental questions with any incident. Yes, you need to understand, have I seen this before? Anywhere else, the IP addresses, files, hashes, etc., and so on. Yeah, you need a historical perspective, absolutely, but just as much for scoping, if nothing else, you need the ability to ask, is there a presence of this file, of this process, of this IP session, of any of my endpoints right now? Otherwise, you're dealing with forensics, not incident response. And both capabilities need to be there. Just to kind of jump in with regards to a question here, does MVision EDR require a McAfee Endpoint security solution? No, it doesn't. It can sit alongside other EPP solutions. Yeah, it is what's the word I'm looking for? You know, it has a standalone capability. Of course, going forward, there will be enhanced synergies if you do use our endpoint protection product like ENS or MVision Endpoints and so on. Definitely there will be synergies, but it doesn't have to be that. It can sit alongside trend, semantic, etc. It doesn't require a specific version there. It does require an EPO. That EPO can be on-prem or a SaaS-based EPO. This is MVision EPO. That definitely it does, but other than that, it doesn't have any other dependencies. In fact, there's only two dependencies. One is EPO, the other one is DXL. If you're using EPO on-premise, you need to have a DXL broker as well. If you're using the SaaS version of EPO, that's MVision EPO, you don't need to have anything else because we are leveraging a cloud bridge for DXL, and the current McAfee agent has DXL built in. So if you're deploying 5.6, and use MVision EPO, there is no other requirements, and this can quite easily sit alongside any other existing EPP solution. So I think I will do, I'll switch into the live demo at this point. So I should be sharing, good. So before I step into the console here, let me just open my clients here. I have the following scenario. I'm not sure if you're familiar with something like Empire. Empire is a post-exploitation framework for PowerShell. I think there was a link to Cobalt Strike, or this is sort of the open source variant of Cobalt Strike to a certain extent, which allows me a command and control backend here for content that I can deliver in various forms. These are payloads I can deliver in various forms. In this case, we have a payload that is attached to an email that's being sent to, let's say, a HR person. As you can see here, this is hi John, thank you so much for your call last week. As discussed, please find my CV below on some Dropbox share, and I'll send this as a targeted attack. to a company recruiter. Typical recruiter will receive tons of these a day. So if this in any shape or form links back to a likely conversation that he had, it's very likely that he will just click on this and open the Word document straight out. And the document opens. And embedded in this document, there's a number of ways it can be done. For example, it can be embedded in that picture because it's a JPEG picture. JPEG can contain executable code. So that may be a way for me to embed it, or it can be just straightforward macro that's embedded in the Word document. There's a number of ways to ultimately embed that payload. As it executes, you can see it here at the back end for the Empire framework, I get a callback back to the command and control center, if you like here, which allows me to then pretty much run remote code here on this. I'm going to just kick in the script just to make this easier. Come on, there we are. No, that's not it. Of course, it had to be about miles away in the back buffer. There we are. No, wrong directory, typical. Should have prepped that better. Apologies. Come on, where's the script directory? Classic. Here, there we are. So I'll kick a script into action here now to actually run content on this command control connection that I have established. And so this, what actually happened in the background, we'll see this in a moment when we're investigating this on EDR, was that PowerShell was launched and some PowerShell scripts were executed, establishing this command and control session. And now I have remote code execution capability. And you can see an alert down here already that, for example, Mimikatz PowerShell was detected here. So there was an attempt, and you can see it on the console as well, that as part of the script, I did a Mimikatz dump to get some credentials for privilege escalation. And then the next step here in the attack would be to start doing some recon. Now, we have some endpoint protection here running that, for example, does pick this up and actually deleted this subsequently, but it might not have blocked this properly, or it might not have blocked it at all, depending how the policies are set up. And then the next step here would be to run a DNS resolution to identify a local zone. I could do a network scan. That would be rather noisy, so I'm trying to avoid that. What I actually do instead is I establish what DNS servers there are, and then try to do a lateral move to one of these DNS servers. Now, the first one, and I actually forgot to open the remote terminal to this one. The first one doesn't work because it has application control installed. So that will fail there because application control, McAfee application control, also has PowerShell parsing capability that will detect this lateral move, which I think is based on WMI transfer. But there is a second DNS server that is sitting there that is not as well protected, and that allows me to do a subsequent transfer to this other machine. So I can then try to do a DNS zone transfer, which allows me to identify the internal zone, identify machines on that, and I can carry the attack on further from there. I don't actually want to go through the attack too deeply, also in the interest of time here now. I just wanted to run an attack through that I get some telemetry that I can then show you in the console as well. So let me just close this here and switch over to EDR. Windows refresh this as well. So in the meantime, this has rolled up, and I have this particular, in fact, yeah, let me just talk you here through the monitoring. There is a number of screens that we use in mVision EDR. The most prevalent ones is the monitoring, investigation screen, historical search, and real-time search. The monitoring screen is really for the security operations analyst dealing with triage. So if we do have a detection, it will roll up in here. It will get assigned a score from high to low. And the reason or how we came to this determination will be based on threat behavior that we've observed. Threat behavior will be classified according to the MITRE matrix. We do a roll-up of the observed attack behaviors. So with some of the solutions, you may get individual alerts for everything that's kind of rolled in. That will look like something like this here. If I switch to the alerting tab, you can see individual alerts, individual techniques, and so on that were detected as part of this attack here now. And you can kind of look at each one in isolation, but that doesn't really help you. What you really need, and what we feel is useful, is to roll related attack steps into one overall threat, which we're ranking then here to the left, either by criticality or by time. Now, picking the one we have here for Windward, I'll parse this out to kind of give us some visibility of what's been going on. And here you can see a daisy chain. I'm sure if you've done any work with EDR type solutions, this shouldn't be unfamiliar. We have a summary view of process activity. So from the initial Explorer that was opened, we had Windward. Windward then opened PowerShell. And in fact, you can see that something rather dodgy here happened. In fact, let me switch this to a different lens so we can see the steps a little bit better. So Windward was opened. There were the sort of the initial executions here for the typical objects that are being opened, temp files. There's a network connection out to, I think this is probably Okta connection or something, MS Identity here for Okta or so. And then the normal template, create a temp file for the template. And here then, we actually have the CV Jane Smith that was downloaded. And following from there, we then have network connections that get established, and then a PowerShell connection that gets opened up. And the network connection that is reaching out, that is somewhat dodgy, will be visible here if I'm going a bit further over in the PowerShell execution. There, this one we want to keep an eye on. That is actually an external IP address it's reaching out to, which actually is the command and control server that I was using earlier on, the Empire framework. Now, this lens, and there's a number of them. I mean, here's sequential view. I can also do this in terms of timeline and score this here this way. That it depends on which way you want to structure this. I'm personally happy here with this sort of drill down. I can do a couple of things at this point. As I touched on before, 3 sort of actions that are possible out of triage. Either this is obviously bad, or this is obviously fine and I don't want to see this again, or I need more information. And these sort of actions are reflected here in the take action bar. I can exclude from threads, or at least dismiss once if I think this is a false positive. Dismiss means go away unless I see this again. Exclude will create basically a thread exclusion for this type of process trace that we've seen, so I don't see this coming up in here again. If I'm not sure, I can create an investigation. I'll come back to that later. If I feel that this is so bad, I want to do something immediately, then I can go and select the device or devices. By the way, that's another differentiator. Many EDR solutions allow you to act on a single device, investigate a single device. But when you have something that involves 10, 20, 30 or more machines, you need to also be able to operate at scale. So if I had additional machines here now, I could select multiple machines and act across these machines in one go. And some of the immediate sort of quick reactions will be things to either quarantine, to stop, or stop and remove the process, and so on. So basically stop process and remove file. These are sort of the most rapid response actions that I can initiate. They're not all. There is far more detailed ones that I have later on when I'm going into real-time searches. But for the sort of immediate emergency actions, they're possible right here from the monitoring tab. Now, I touched on real-time searches now a number of times. So let me show you what that might look like. So we had the document here. We've established that this particular document is probably part of this attack. So I might want to know, A, is this document still there? Can I actually get that document still? Or has it been deleted? Like ransomware will often try and clean up its traces by deleting the original source files. Or I might want to establish, especially since this is based on an email thread, was this just one recipient or was it multiple recipients, and does this document exist anywhere else? So I can go here and ask to either find this file on the device or on all devices. Let me do that here now, which creates a real-time search query automatically from the information available that is now being pushed out to all my managed devices via DXL and gives me an answer back within a couple of seconds. That's why it's referred to as real-time search. If you want to be precise, you call it near real-time, but the bottom line is if you did this manually or through other tools that are available, it will take you significantly longer. And I'm talking in the realm of hours and instances that are very large to get anything similar to this back. So as you can see here now, the response came back from some 7 systems that have, some of them are repeat ones from past detections that were there, etc. But I have the visibility here, and I can then select a particular machine here and step into detailed response actions, which can be to delete the entire folder or to reboot the operating system to maybe clear something that isn't properly persistent, or I can do stop and remove contents, etc. I can also go for particular files. I think we have a custom reaction in here to go and say, take that file and submit that to ATD. ATD is Advanced Threat Defense. That's our sandbox solution, which even now can be leveraged through a custom rule, but we're in the process of building tighter integrations between this product and existing ATD deployments, which includes ATD deployments on-prem, which of course has benefits around GDPR again, because your documents don't leave your premises. So I know some customers prefer that over sending documents into cloud infrastructures. And there will be tight integration, but at present, we're already able to take this file, for example, now via a custom rule and throw that into ATD, which then, of course, may give you more insights in case this document wasn't executed yet. And the IOCs that I get through ATD, which, by the way, I can bring back up again to the SIEM using the taxi support we have in ATD, or a direct, if you're using McAfee SIEM, there's a cyber threats connector that allows that information to flow up, which then again is available for both correlations as well as enrichment queries when I'm going through an investigation. This is the sort of, yes, please.
A question regarding this remediation that you have showed us now here. One of the things that I know that we have seen that the customers ask about regarding EDR and so on, it's out. They actually at some point want to do some more automation of those remediations. Mm-hmm. So how is it within your EDR solution? Is it possible to do some automation regarding those things? Because we know that a lot of the customers, they don't have the manpower in order to sit and do that every minute.
If you can build your playbooks, you can absolutely integrate this into a SOAR tool. I mentioned a few of them earlier on. So the most common ones that I come across are, Phantom Cyber, Demisto. Phantom Cyber is obviously now owned by Splunk. Demisto, I think it was Palo Alto that bought them, and Swimlane is still available as well. They're the 3 probably largest SOAR tools that are there that are commercial. There's open source ones as well, like Intel MQ and Node-RED, and probably a couple more as well. And you can absolutely build playbooks that will automate reaction scenarios. I don't have something I can demonstrate here now for this particular session. But these sort of queries, as well as the response actions, can absolutely build into playbooks, yes. Now, going back to my investigation here. So as I said, triage largely means you decide between 3 possible outcomes. Definitely good, definitely bad, haven't got a clue. If it's the latter, then what we do is we say, create an investigation. This really kicks in the expert system that I was referring to. You'll see we have a couple of investigations here that have, including some here that are linked or actually been triggered by Phantom Cyber. They could also be triggered by other platforms. They can also be triggered or are linked to ticket system. That's actually the more common question that I get around the integrations that are possible or that would be needed, because this process in many organizations doesn't involve one person. The person doing the investigation may not be the same person that's allowed to actually do any actions. in terms of putting things onto blacklists, deleting files, shutting down machines or quarantining them, and so on. If there's a separation of duty between the investigator and the responder, you have at least 2 people involved. In most SOCs, there tends to be a tier structure as well from an investigation perspective. So your tier 1 analyst will do the preliminary analysis and gather some information, but then if he cannot make a determination, he may escalate this to a tier 2 or maybe tier 3 analyst. These analysts can be in-house, or they can be provided by a partner as a service offering. So including that can be a service offering that involves all the way tier 1 up to 3, as a full service wrap, or it can be a scenario where tier 1 is kept in-house, because that also preserves organizational intelligence, meaning familiarity with the systems, with what is normal, what's not normal, and so on. And escalation is then pretty much handled through a partner that has staff on hand to do more detailed investigation on things that have been qualified, for lack of a different word. All of these are, first of all, able within the product. There is the capability for multiple users and handoff of investigations between users, but it can also be linked to ticket systems like the Hive or ServiceNow to create tickets, trace tickets, link back to investigations, so on, to manage that workflow. So let me pick the particular investigation that links to what we were just looking at. So an investigation is not instant, because the system will reach back out to clients to pull back snapshot information, to interrogate historical data from the device traces, and so on. So in a few minutes, so 2, 3, 4 minutes, maybe 5, you will see the investigation starting to build out, and you get this sort of summary screen here. As well as indications above. So just visualize what we're looking at. Initially, this particular thread involved some 250 artifacts. These are external IP addresses, URLs, registry keys, processes, files, etc. If you were working with a conventional EDR solution, this is kind of where you would start your investigation now. You'd be able to ask maybe a preliminary question like any execution from a recycle bin, but then you would have to do that interrogation that I outlined earlier in terms of the daisy chain of questions. You would have to do that yourself manually. With the expert system, this has already been done. So it whittles down the involved artifacts to only some 57 and 7 key findings. And these key findings are also listed here on the left under the investigation guides. The investigation guides can be structured in a number of ways, including also questions according to MITRE or hierarchical. I'll just leave them as they are right now to kind of talk through them. First of all, it identified an uncommon process. This can be relevant or it might not, because there is a certain amount of baselining that we can do in the product to reduce white noise. But with EDR solutions, you don't want to filter too much. That's contrary to what you're trying to achieve with EDR, because you're going to deal with stuff that probably has escaped your set rules, your set detection capabilities. So you need to look at the white noise around it to get the context to maybe identify something that your existing control mechanisms weren't able to pick up. Some things can be excluded. So there's a bit of baseline that we're doing in production with this, using snapshots from COE systems or golden images to eliminate obvious things that are not involved, which makes the uncommon processes and uncommon services a little bit more relevant. But this is just additional context. More relevant are things like sockets being opened by processes which don't commonly do it. And that highlights, a couple of particular ones here already. But if I drill in further, I have processes with signs of malicious usage. I always stumble across this one. And if I pick this one up, I have PowerShell executions. Yeah, there's PowerShell. And there's 2 processes that were pulled up. And if I pick this one and look at the data, then I have actually what I was seeing before early on in the trace as well. So it's confirmed here. This is you have the full command line here, so you have PowerShell being executed with execution bypass and hidden attributes and so on, and it's reaching out to this external IP address to pull scripts from. That's the command and control server that I was using in the attack. And a subsequent execution here, if I look at the data there, then executes some encoded content here that's also been pulled. More probably the content that was just pulled by that action here is being executed there. And in classical timing, of course, is throwing me out at this moment. Let's let this reset and we step back into this again. Apologies. So back into my investigation. Pull up graphical. Come on. Now, while this builds out, of course, typical demo monkey here now. Let me refresh that. There we are. So, and we were at malicious there. At this point, I might want to ask additional questions. So you can see the system has gone over the data. It's asked some questions. It provided various context and information around it. Yeah, so I can, for example, take this one. There's a reach out to an IP address. If I look here, yeah, that's that external IP address. So I might want to see information about reputation. So both GTI as well as VirusTotal reports here are available that I can click on to, for example, query this particular IP address. This comes up as clean because this is part of our demo setup. So this hasn't been reported out. But if this was a genuine one and there was any information available about it, then of course I might get some indications here already as well. So there is some external ones that I can review, but I can also ask internal questions. So I could ask, well, have I seen this process anywhere else? And if another machine is identified as part of this, it will pop up here, and I have the opportunity to go and deploy a snapshot to this particular machine. Remember, snapshot is this additional data collection that's done through EPO. So for a managed device, I can then add this to the investigation and do subsequent analysis. I can also go for things like IP addresses here, like the one that I identified, and I can ask, well, have I seen any information from NetFlow devices? Or in fact, this is the enrichment question I meant, have I seen this on the SIEM? Now, what's the value here? So I'm just looking at my time, and I want to bring this definitely to a close. Let me show you the whiteboard very quickly, kind of just to illustrate why that is relevant. And apologies for the slightly clunky design of this. Normally I do this on a proper whiteboard, but nowadays we have to do everything virtual. So we have a somewhat visual representation of the attack that I had earlier, right? So the attacker, this is the command and control server that the attacker has control to. He sent a spear phishing mail to that first victim, code was executed, etc. And then I had a lateral movement. I'm showing an application server here, but what actually happened in the attack was a DNS server, could be a subsequent move towards an application server. I'm establishing persistence there, and then, for example, establish a remote session back out to my command and control server that gives me access again that I actually can work directly on this machine now. Now, this is not uncommon because what often happens is that I have some form of detection here. You might remember we had that Mimikatz detection early on that laptop. It could also be that some other form of malware was dropped there, and it might even be dropped there intentionally because the attacker knows that it will set off an alert in terms of a malware detection. And a lot of incident responders or analysts, IT ops, SecOps people might look at that and think, yeah, there was malware. Oh, it was blocked. Fine, so we're good. I have remediated. Have I? No, I haven't. Remediation requires understanding, MTTU, of the attack. And as an attacker, I can use this sort of shortcut thinking on the fact that so many of them are so overloaded with information and with alerts and so on. I can actually use that to throw them off track. So I can throw in an easy detectable thing in there just to create an alert to kind of get them into this false confidence that things are fine. In fact, any other associated noise around this might be attributed to the attack we already blocked anyway. So I'm not investigating this any further. And that gives me room to do my lateral movement off to the other box. maybe the incident responder decides to do full remediation. So what is full remediation for a lot of companies? Well, it's wiping the laptop, reinstalling it, re-imaging it. So this is out of the picture here. Have I stopped the attack? No, because it's over here. So he can now use the scenario that this app server is actually attached to the backend network here, which is attached to a database, do a discovery as well as extraction of data. And then he's gonna think about how I'm gonna extract this. Now, the reason why I'm pulling this whiteboard up here is the extraction happens not via the application server itself, but it's using an IP camera, which gets reflashed. And I'm using the storage on the IP camera now to act as some form of FTP server or whatever to stage this and extract this out. Why the IP camera? Because it's not a managed device. Yeah, so this is outside the perimeter of my managed device estate. Excuse me 1 second. Therefore, that connection may fall outside the realm of my EDR capability. I won't see it. I would see it though, if I have the ability to take this IP address now and ask of the SIEM system if it has seen this external IP address anywhere else. Because the firewall logs, the IPS logs, maybe any other logs and so on that have net flow information in them might contain this and might point to this external device, which completes my investigation then, because in the investigation, I may find the initial device as well as the application server, as well as the extraction point and so on. And that's how you need to approach more complex attacks. Is there a way to fully automate this so that it just works by itself? Absolutely not. If we were able to do that, then we wouldn't need EDR. What can be fully automated and so on will likely be in your endpoint protection. There is no replacing the analyst in this chain. You notice I'm stressing this rather strongly because I've been getting this question over and over and over, and I do understand where it comes from. But this is not something that can be completely automated. If that was the case, we would do it, we would build mechanisms around it. There can be architectures, the SOAR ones that I mentioned, that can help fast track some of the components. But as you saw earlier on, when I put the metrics graph up here, let me just pull this up again. There is a, oh, come on. No, that was the wrong one. Hello. There is a reason why there is a human in that chain. Yeah, we have done what we can from a acceleration automation perspective here on the front end using these guided investigations. You can do an awful lot with regards to SOAR tools and so on to accelerate response capability, but the human still needs to make the decision. If that is something that a customer doesn't have the necessary staff or skills for. And of course, the guided system here does provide some guidance in terms of how to interpret this or moving towards that decision point. If that's not sufficient, then it, in many instances, requires a service provider, a partner that provides some additional capability like that tier 2 support and so on to assist in clarifying or stepping through more complex response actions. The alternative is to let it fly under the radar and you have potentially the next breach. That's reality. So just looking at time, we're about 2 minutes before the full hour. Are there any other questions that I missed?
I got a few for you.
Okay.
One of the things that we know about EDR is it's basically known for its complexity. Mm-hmm. And how is it with MVision EDR? One of the things that I know that you actually is hitting on when you talk about it is do more with the same people. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the EDR. So is it easier to use the McAfee EDR rather than using a competitor, for example?
Absolutely, and I was trying to highlight that when we were stepping through the guided investigation on this year. You might remember the spider web sort of graphical representation. If you have to sift through this stuff manually, with maybe just some rudimentary search capability, you're going to spend significantly more time and require more expertise to actually derive some meaningful information from that. Anybody who's ever had any sort of forensic training or so knows that investigating a machine that's suspicious is time consuming. If you're doing this analysis manually, you're going through memory captures to look for strings that look suspicious. You look through registry keys that might have changed that look suspicious, but it requires understanding what is suspicious. You need to know what's normal, what's not normal, and that only comes from expertise, and it's time consuming. So what we've done is, with the expert system we built in, we've taken a significant portion of this in terms of interpreting what is suspicious, what is not. And I will just step here onto this again, like the ability to just bring this here from the 250, and it's, by the way, not uncommon to have over 1,000, 2,000 artifacts in here, and to drill that down then to just here, look, this particular process or these processes, they look suspicious. That is a significant time saving. And it's not just based because this process is from a file that has a bad hash that's known somewhere. It's based on behavior. Right? It's based on what particular actions were observed. Let me just go back to the endpoint trace we had here, just because I just realized I never showed the historical device search. So if I take this machine here and actually step into the historical search for it, and I just want to look at the last 4 hours and look at the alerts, these are the actual actions that were individual actions that were observed. Yeah, I think we had from the it's kind of started here. So executed PowerShell with a very long command line, deleted a file via PowerShell, then executed suspicious PowerShell commands via macro, and then all these subsequent steps and so on. The interpretation, the classification in terms of what technique here, these are MITRE techniques here, as well as the indicators, the system is doing that for you. The analyst doesn't have to do that. So that's already a time saving on an enablement of somebody who wouldn't necessarily be an expert threat hunter.
Cool. Any more questions for Marcus?
Right, then we're pretty much on time.
Yeah, I think we are good on time today. If there are any questions that you don't give us now, then just write us an email and then we will answer it to it. Otherwise, I will like to say thank you, Marcus, for a very good walkthrough of what McAfee EDR is. Yes, thank you for your time and hope to hear from everyone soon.
Okay, very good. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you sometime, maybe at one of the events that we're running or that Arrow is running as well in the future when we're allowed to meet up again. Right? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.